Now that the craziest trade deadline in recent memory has come to a close, I think it would be fun to talk about some teams that did well at the deadline and some who didn't have such a great time. Starting off with the Miami Heat, I have them as winners. The Jimmy Butler trade drama is finally over, and the Heat players will finally be able to have life go back to normal. They've been playing pretty well without Jimmy this year, but now they've got a pretty nice return from the Warriors for the disgruntled star they gave up. Of course, it will hurt to lose a player as good as Jimmy Butler, but since Butler said he only wanted to play for a team that would extend him, it was the right move for Miami. Extending Butler is an objectively risky move for a front office, as he's been injury prone his time in Miami, and Butler will be 36 at the start of his next contract. Instead, the Heat get a very good wingback in Andrew Wiggins, a great defensive guard in Davion Mitchell, and a quality bench big in Kyle Anderson. These players fill multiple holes for the Heat and make them younger, which will allow them to be a better regular season team now and in the future. And on top of that, they also received the Warriors' first round pick in this year's draft, which could very easily wind up being a lottery pick. The first team I have as losers of the deadline are the Sacramento Kings. While the Kings were put in a bad position from De'Aaron Fox requesting a trade, the Kings front office did an extremely poor job of using the trade to help their franchise. As painful as it would have been for Kings fans, the right move for the franchise was to sell Fox and DeRozan at the deadline and go into another rebuild. As awful as it would have been, I think the fans would have understood rebuilding, but instead the Kings are continuing to try to win now. A core of Sabonis, DeRozan, LaVine is not getting you anywhere near the NBA Finals or even a conference finals appearance. Now the Kings are essentially just a slightly better version of the Bulls team from the past few years who never won a playoff series and missed the playoffs almost every year of the DeRozan and LaVine era. Then, after the Fox trade, the Kings wound up trading for Jonas Valanciunas, giving up a young prospect and a couple second-rounders in return. It's bad enough that they decided not to rebuild with the Fox trade, but then deciding to double down and make another win-now move is just silly. The only reason why this deadline wasn't a complete failure is because they were able to get a good young wing in Jake LaRavia from the Memphis Grizzlies, and the Wolves' 2031 first-round pick, which could be very valuable if Anthony Edwards winds up getting frustrated with the Timberwolves organization. The next winner of the trade deadline that I have is the Los Angeles Lakers. Obviously, the Lakers were the biggest winners of the trade deadline as they essentially secured themselves a top 5 player for the next decade. The Lakers also went and got themselves Mark Williams. Unfortunately for the Lakers, Mark Williams failed his physical, resulting in the trade getting rescinded. As a result of the failed trade for Williams, the Lakers have a black hole at the center position, and now that the trade deadline has come and gone, they will only be able to add free agents or sign players who are bought out. However, they can't sign any buyout players who had a salary of over $12.8 million since they are in the first apron, so they won't be able to sign anyone that will make a major difference. So they may not be strong contenders this year for the championship because of the botched Williams trade, but acquiring a player as talented as Luka and most likely being able to have him be the face of your franchise for the next decade is about as good as you could possibly do at the deadline, and to me they're the clear winners of the deadline. The next team who I thought lost at the trade deadline is the Phoenix Suns. While the Suns did acquire some decent role players at the deadline, Cody Martin and Nick Richards, those players won't move the needle for them. It's no secret that the Suns were desperately trying to trade for Jimmy Butler, but they were unable to get it done. I don't know how well Jimmy would have improved the Suns' odds of winning the finals, but I know that with the Suns' current roster, they have a 0% chance of winning a championship. Reports on the team came out that if they were unable to trade for Jimmy Butler, they would think about trading Kevin Durant, but obviously that did not come to fruition. Personally, I think that would have been the move, as they're now stuck in no man's land, and a Kevin Durant trade would have at least netted them a very good player or two along with good draft compensation. This would have helped to give the front office a ton of capital to help retool around Devin Booker, but instead they're deciding to keep rocking with a mediocre, old roster that has no chance of competing. It's wild to see how far they've fallen in the past years, as they were once up 2-0 in the finals, then had the best record in the league the next season, and now they're stuck in no man's land with arguably the worst contract in the sport in Bradley Beal. The last winners of the trade deadline that I have are the San Antonio Spurs. The Spurs pulled off a heist of a trade in acquiring De'Aaron Fox from the Kings, and now have given Victor Wembanyama a true co-star, which will make his life on the court a whole lot easier. I thought Trae Young would be the perfect fit for the Spurs since you'd be pairing a great offensive engine next to Victor Wembanyama, but since Trae wasn't available yet, De'Aaron Fox was the best option. Fox seems like he'll be a great fit with Wemby, as he can go out and get you a bucket with ease and can also play make pretty well, and should set up Wemby for some easy buckets. It also helps that Fox is an underrated defender and is adept at cutting off ball handlers from driving into the paint, which could have been a big problem if the Spurs had waited to go after Trae Young. The Spurs acquiring De'Aaron Fox was a huge win, but the way that they were able to get him made the move look even better, as the Spurs didn't have to give up any of their promising young players from their core. It was looking like San Antonio would have to give up at least one of Stephon Castle, Devin Vassell, or Jeremy Sohan, but they were able to complete the deal without shipping out any of them. They were also able to keep the Hawks' 2025 first-round pick that they acquired from the DeJounte Murray trade a few years back, which will most likely land somewhere in the 5 to 10 range. If the Luka trade hadn't happened, the Spurs would have been far and away the biggest winners of the trade deadline. And as my last losers of the deadline, I have the Chicago Bulls. I'm not sure there's a more apathetic franchise in all of basketball than the Chicago Bulls. They're completely directionless and don't seem to care about anything else other than selling tickets, which they'll always be able to do because of the city they play in and the brand that Michael Jordan built in the 90s. They did deal Zach LaVine at the deadline, but they barely got anything back for him. Kevin Huerter, Trey Jones, and Zach Collins are fine NBA players at best, but right now none of the three appear to be players any contending team would want in their rotation. This has to be one of the worst packages of players you could possibly receive for a player as good as Zach LaVine is currently. I'm not even a big Zach LaVine guy, but these being players you get back from is sad. The Bulls were able to get back their first-round pick for this year, which is a great year to have your own pick as a bad team, but the front office decided not to go all in on tanking for whatever reason. Instead of selling Vucevic when his stock is at the highest it's been as a Bull, Chicago decided to hang on to him instead, which could only have a negative result as he won't play any better than this in the future. But he will contribute to winning a few games this year, which will only hurt the Bulls' odds of getting the number one pick, or at least high up in the draft lottery. It's just another move by the Bulls front office that is just plunging them deeper into the abyss of mediocrity that they've been in for the past few years. It really does seem like the front office doesn't care about the product they put on the floor, and that they just care that the team is okay enough to put people in the seats, which is a frustrating thing to see from a fan of the league and must be enraging as a fan of the Bulls.